Bonjour. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We'll just give a few more minutes just to have everyone enter the call room, and then we'll begin. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Just a quick test. If you can let me know in the chat, if you can hear myself, if you can hear me. We're going to begin in just 1 minute. We'll just give a little bit more time for everyone to join the room. Thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. Great. I see Selma, Elizabeth. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go ahead and begin. So I just wanted to say welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming to our 4th webinar in a series hosted by the Women in Africa Initiative and Deloitte in the Africa region. This afternoon session will last about 1 hour and will be on the subject of managing diversity. So thank you so much for joining. We're very happy to have you, and we're looking forward to a great discussion. So just so you know who you're speaking with this afternoon, we'll introduce your facilitators. So my name is Nicole Kelm. I'm a manager with the consulting service line for Deloitte in Brazzaville in the Republic of the Congo. And I'm joined by my colleague, Sophia. Sophia, can you introduce yourself? Hello, Sophia, are you on the line?
Yes, Nicole.
Great, so, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this training session. We are very pleased to have you on board. My name is Sophia Benasser. I am a manager for Deloitte Gabon, and I am specialized in the human capital and the technology field.
Thanks, Sophia. Welcome. So we'll just very quickly explain a few ground rules for this session this afternoon. So we hope it to be an interactive exchange. It's an opportunity for you to ask questions and spark discussion between us and all the participants online. So don't be afraid to ask your questions as we go along. There are no bad questions. Also, don't hesitate to share your experiences or ask for advice if there's a specific issue or question that you have. This webinar is truly yours. It's an opportunity to learn, share, and exchange with both other participants as well as your facilitation team. Also, just as a note, please silence your phones and mute your microphone if you're not speaking. As we're using broadcast mode, you may not be able to unmute your mic. So please use the chat or the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen to ask questions if you have them. All right, so the first section of this afternoon's presentation will begin with a definition of diversity. So Sophia, over to you to take us into the content.
Sure. All right, so before we start explaining what is diversity, could you please, through the chat box, explain in one word, what does diversity mean to you? To your keyboard, please. One word to describe diversity. Differences, says Cindy. Multicultural variety. Fun, from Sarah. Different attributes. One last answer. Different, the uniqueness. Beautiful word. Collective, kind, respect. Several culture. We have plenty of beautiful words to describe diversity. Nicole, can you go ahead?
Yes. So let's kind of dig into this idea of diversity. So it was a concept that originated in the United States in the early 1980s. And it was designed to kind of discuss the benefits of multiculturalism in the workplace. Originally, it was oriented towards racial issues, which we all know is a big issue in the United States. But then it was quickly expanded to include other aspects of identity, such as people with disabilities, gender equity, and intergenerational issues such as ageism in the workplace. Today, diversity is even more expansive, and it covers questions related to religious affiliation, sexual orientation, intercultural management, social origin. So this relates to your class or wealth status, well-being at work, work-life balance, the type of family you have, the type of life that you lead, as well as talent management. In companies, this concept was often accompanied by this new role, this idea of having a diversity manager or a diversity and inclusion manager. And today, managing diversity is the responsibility of many different areas in a business. So it might include human resources, customer relations, or even external communication.
Thank you, Nicole, for the definition. So now we're going to make another poll. In one word, again, in the chat box, could you describe the difference between diversity and inclusion? One word to describe difference between diversity and inclusion.
Anyone know the difference? Go ahead and put it in the chat.
So Angela, diversity is presence while inclusion is participation. Nice. Sarah says to be result oriented. Nice also. Maybe one last try, collectiveness.
Okay. So this is a key concept for understanding management of diversity, because diversity and inclusion are not the same thing. So inclusion means feeling welcomed, respected, that you're treated fairly, and that you have access to the same development and career opportunities as others. It's not just having a place at the table, which is the concept of diversity. We have a diverse team, we have other people here. But inclusion is actually having a voice at that table. So we have a quote here by Verna Myers, who kind of very succinctly explains the two ideas. Diversity means being invited to the party. Inclusion is being invited to dance. It goes beyond just presence. It's about being able to participate and being fully included in all the processes in an organization.
Thank you, Nicole. So now we're going to discuss why diversity is so important to business. Diversity is important to businesses for two reasons. The first one is about innovation. Why? Because a company that does not innovate is a company that dies. How can you innovate and create value when all the people who work in the company have the same experience, same education, and same background? How can you think out of the box in a group of people that all look like to each other? And second reason why diversity is important to innovate is that today your workplace, your people, the people who work in the company must reflect your customer database. How can you offer proper, accurate services to your clients and customers if the people who build these services do not understand how your clients think? So that is one main reason why diversity is essential for innovation. The second reason why diversity is a truly central topic is that today the faces of our cities, the faces of our universities, the faces of our companies have changed. 50 years ago, the average worker was a white man of 50 years old. Today, there is no typical face of the average workers. In the United States, workers are from Hispanic origin, Black origin, Asian origin, and so on. So now companies have to understand how to deal with this, how to deal with this subject that is not an exception anymore, but a rule.
Great. Thanks, Sophia, for that additional detail. How businesses do business. Often we see it in the form of a diversity charter or a diversity program. And that often focuses on three areas where we're seeing a lot of success in the diversity and inclusion space. So the first being recruiting. And some of the successes we've seen are better access to the job market for people with disabilities, prohibition of discriminatory hiring practices. And this may be towards people of a different race, religion, culture, gender, it doesn't matter what the dimension is. And also openness to more varied academic profiles. So no longer always hiring from the same schools or the same type of expertise, for example, hiring only people with business background. And in some organizations, you know, they might eschew the idea of having specific academic requirements at all. So the second area where we see some changes is the domain of promotion. So there's been a big trend towards using more fact-based, objective-oriented evaluation processes, making it less subjective, less subject to bias. Also, we see a lot of programs that target women or young people or minorities for management positions, as well as leadership programs that focus on diversifying business lines or cutting across industry, as well as targeting these groups. And the last area where we see a lot of change is in the zone of decision making. So we see many organizations seeking to increase the presence of women, for example, on executive committees or boards. We see also the use of young boards or shadow boards. And in Deloitte Francophone Africa, we use this tool here in our own organizations where we have a young advisory board a group of relatively junior employees that advise the senior executive. Also, what we see is the appointment of external CEOs. So those coming from other cultures, or other geographical locations, or sometimes even other industries, where a CEO might come in from a completely different industry in order to run a large enterprise. So in this way, we can see how a diversity charter or a diversity program is both an organizational management tool, but also can be an external communication tool. It makes a statement about your organization. It explains something about your values and priorities. And in that way, the diversity charter can be very useful.
Thank you, Nicole. So as highlighted by Nicole, many and lots of achievements have been made to improve the way we manage differences and diversity in the workplace. Yet, up to now, there are lots of challenges that still remain in terms of recruitment, even if a lot has been made to have less discriminatory practices. There are still discrimination in the hiring, in addition to the fact that we are speaking about matters that are difficult to prove and to document. In terms of promotion, also, most management positions are still held by men, and management and leadership positions granted to people tend to be granted to people who are similar to us, same school, same origin, same profession, same background. In terms of management, although a lot has been done to help the middle management to implement and foster diversity on the in the workplace, well, training unfortunately is not always sufficient enough, and sometimes there might be a gap between the speech and the discourse and the practice and the reality. So when the managers leave the training and that they do not see that what they have learned is really applied in the company, they tend to forget what they have learned. Or to say differently, they do not have the chance to implement what they have learned. In terms of decision making, there is still a low representation on management committees regarding the presence of women, people from foreign origin, and other minority groups. For example, hiring sometimes might be very open for positions with no executive level, but then the higher you go in the organization and the less you see diversity. Even if on the base, at the base level, you can have a lot of colored people, for example. There is an additional challenge that we have to take into consideration. Nicole, can you click on next, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's artificial intelligence, and we are speaking here about algorithms, and the fact that algorithms might also push to discrimination. And what you would like to do is to show you a short video of 1 minute that will explain how algorithms can create discrimination in the recruitment process. Thank you, Nicole.
Okay, and I'm just going to switch the screen share briefly in order to share the video. Just one moment as it's loading. We're having some internet issues in Congo today. So I apologize for the technical difficulties. It should be coming to a screen near you shortly here. Here we go.
We do not hear the sound.
Oh. Can you see it now?
We can see it.
Okay,
but
perfect.
I believe there is no sound. Can you make a quick test?
No sound, okay. Let me make sure. Okay, and we should have sound now. Is that working now?
Can you click on play?
Sorry, Sophia, go ahead.
Can you click on play?
Sorry?
Can you click on play? To see
On
if the
play?
video... Play, yes. The video
Okay.
is not being played.
Okay, let me try again. Hopefully you can see it and hear it. If not, we'll have to move on, but I'm very, very sorry for the technical difficulties.
It's okay.
Any luck now?
No, maybe we can move to the next slide. It's okay.
Okay, so we'll go to the next slide again. I apologize. Okay.
Can you click next, Nicole, please?
I am trying.
Ah.
Okay, hold on one second. Basically would have shown us that the bias that exists in AI systems is based on human behavior, and that whatever biases we have as individuals will also be translated into any sort of artificial intelligence or machine learning system that we can create. And I see that, is it Sarah has shared the link in the video for those of you who weren't able to see it. So now we'll talk a little bit about specifically the diversity in the context of the African region. So the continent is one of the most diverse in the world. So there are more than 1,500 languages, more than 50 countries, more than 3,000 tribes, and some of the greatest human genetic diversity in the world. In addition to that, we have religious groups, ethnic groups, many different climate zones, and biodiversity to take into consideration. So how can we leverage all this diversity across this beautiful continent for good, for the benefit of all? We know that diversity has many benefits in business. Studies have shown that businesses that are more diverse are more innovative. There's some evidence to suggest that it's easier for them to recruit talent because they kind of hold the door open for everyone. They are able to be representative of a broader client base. They can appeal to more customers because they have a more diverse team. It helps them to improve the brand image. It can also help to improve employee engagement because they feel included and represented by the organization. Also, organizations with more diverse teams tend to have higher revenues related to innovation and often increased profitability. And it's interesting to note the studies on increased profitability because most often that is studied in relation to gender diversity. And lastly, when we look at more diverse teams, they tend to be more creative and are better able to problem solve at the end of the day. So then let's talk a little bit more in detail about gender specifically. So gender is only one aspect of diversity, but it's very well studied. So we can see how this single facet of diversity has the potential to have a huge impact. So there are many things to be excited about in this region. So the first being that Africa is the number one continent in terms of female entrepreneurship. 27% of African women start a business, and that is the highest level in the world. 25% of political representatives in Africa are women, which is again higher than the world average. And we also have higher than average female representation on boards of directors, for example. However, there's still some room to grow, some room to improve. Women globally are responsible for 60% of the work, but earn only about 10% of the global income and own 1% of its assets. Women make up more than 50% of the total population in Africa and produce more than 62% of the economic goods, but only 8.5% are salaried, and many are underpaid or work in the informal sector where benefits are more limited. Women in Africa generated only 33% of the continent's overall GDP, and many women are financially excluded from formal structures. Lastly, the continent has a financing gap, which is access to financing of US $42 billion between men and women. And some studies have estimated that gender inequity costs Africa $95 billion a year, or 6% of the continent's GDP. So now that we're entering section 2, we're going to do a quick handoff on the screen share. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Sophia take over here.
Okay, just 1 second. Okay. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yep, we can see.
Perfect. Let me just go to the beginning of the part 2. So confirm that everybody sees the screen?
Yes, we can see.
Great. So we arrived at the end of the first section that focused more on defining diversity and its multiple components. We wanted to give you a holistic view of what diversity implies and not focus only on diversity that is related to women issues. Because as a manager, as a leader, you are going to manage people who come from different backgrounds. So now that we have defined diversity, we're going to enter the second sequence that will focus on how to manage diversity. And one important point that you have to have in mind is that when it comes to managing diversity, we can be, even the most well-intentioned person can have discriminatory practices toward a group of people or a group of persons. And how does this occur? This occurs because of a process, a mental process that is named cognitive bias. What is cognitive bias? It's a deviation from what could be the rational expectation response to a situation. Our bias are actually the result of shortcuts that our brain takes most of the time unconsciously in order to save energy and time. These shortcuts are useful since without them we would be overwhelmed with information and we would be unable to make decisions on a daily basis. They help us to better process this huge amount of information. Biases are in some way the side effect of this adaptive process, which lead us in certain situations to make mistakes and to create distortion. If we had to summarize the impact of cognitive bias on our brain, we could say that our brain works on autopilot mode, and so we respond through an autopilot mode. So it makes us make misjudgments, mistakes, and maybe it can make us have discriminatory practice toward the person, and it's the autopilot that think and respond, and not our consciousness. So to understand more in depth what is cognitive bias, and how they can distort the way we think and the way we take a decision as a leader, we propose you to make a social experiment based on the video we are going to show. So the video is about guessing a riddle. So I invite you to listen carefully to the riddle and to try to give the answer you think is right in the chat box. Can you confirm that everybody hear the sound? Nicole, sound is good?
Go ahead and press play. Let's see. No, no sound at the moment.
Okay, maybe, is there any specific setting I have to make to share the sound?
Yeah, so in the share screen, there should be a drop down on the right-hand side, and you should be able to see a button at the bottom to share sound.
Part of an experiment.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep, perfect.
Thank you, Nicole.
To explore the human mind, we asked 22 people to solve the same riddle and recorded their responses. Feel free to participate also. Are you ready?
The riddle. A father is about to bring his son to a job interview, applying for a position at a large stockbrokers company in the city. Just as they arrive at the company's parking lot, the son's phone rings. He looks at his father, who says, "Go ahead, answer it." The caller is the trading company CEO, who says, "Good luck, son, you've got this." The son ends the call and once again looks at his father, who is still next to him in their car. How is this possible?
You get a call from the CEO, but it says,
"Good luck, son."
But he was next to him.
So it's not the father.
I think it was probably an audio recording of his father.
Maybe he made a demo tape.
Like he has two fathers.
This is a hard one.
Maybe it's a word joke, like it's
the grandfather of the son.
No, I think his name is Son.
I don't know.
Maybe it's just like an old man, you know, calling a younger guy son.
I have no idea.
The answer. It's his mother.
Ah! Oh, that's so stupid. Yes, of course. Ah, sure.
So, did you have the answer to this riddle? Nicole, can you have a look at the responses in the chat box?
Yes, so I see a few people got it.
Okay.
So Dr. Jacqueline and one other, Inia Bassi, but several people did not get it, Leila. And then somebody is asking, why did we think the CEO would be a male? Which is, I think, the very important point. So we had a few who got it and a few who did not.
Okay, great. Thank you for the responses, everyone. So this social experiment, just to show that we all carry cognitive bias inside us. As you can see, the people who are part of the panel in the video are women, so you cannot accuse them of being of not being of doing discrimination against women. So it's something, cognitive bias is something that is inner to us, and there is nothing wrong about that. But what we can do regarding this cognitive bias is understand when it is is to understand when it's the shortcuts that is thinking and from when it is our consciousness. So we must be aware that we have a cognitive bias to be able to be able not to commit discrimination against people. So to summarize, having cognitive bias is something that is natural. We all have them. There is nothing wrong with it. What we can do is try to understand them, to recognize them, so we can avoid discriminatory practices. So the next slide will present an overview of some cognitive bias that we have selected. This is not an exhaustive list. Those are just some examples. So among the bias that we're going to introduce in this slide, there is the confirmation bias. It's the fact to retain only the information that supports your judgment. There is the anchoring bias. It's the tendency to stay with the first impression that you have. There is the availability bias. It's the difficulty to assimilate new information. There is the mental model bias. It's when you use existing information and preconception to interpret new information, or to say it more simply, it's when you use information from the past to understand the present. It works most of the time, but sometimes it does not work. There is the halo effect, which consists in focusing on a characteristic that one appreciates in a person to conclude that this person is a good person. And there is the authority bias, which is the fear of contradicting the expert or leader, or the fear of giving your opinion because you are not an expert or a leader. And there is the attribution bias, which is which consists in judging a person on the basis of what is visible and underestimating situational factors. For example, if somebody is late, not trying to understand why this person is late.
So then there are several types of bias that are more relevant when it comes to management, and specifically management of diverse groups. So the first is partial vision bias. So where we make judgments based on a single piece of information or a single opinion.
Nicole?
And we rush to organize a meeting to make a decision. And that can sometimes lead to groupthink, where we undervalue the importance of individual reflection. And that can be problematic if our meeting is always with the same type of people or the same group of people. Overconfidence bias, which is thinking your proposal is best. This one is probably the most obvious. We've probably all had a boss that maybe had overconfidence bias, but it's thinking your proposal is best or giving blind trust to managerial intuition. A guru's bias. This one is where you take the opinion of an expert as an absolute truth. And that can sometimes be limiting, as an expert only has one point of view as well. And the last version of bias that we're probably all most familiar with is the stereotype bias. And this is where we give more value to the opinions of people who are like us, or we stereotype others and limit our consideration of their opinions. So these are some types of bias that are more relevant for management specifically. Sophia, can we go to the next one?
Yes, okay.
So what can we actually do? So as Sophia has mentioned, bias is a natural phenomenon. It actually helps our brains to process information more quickly. It's a mental shortcut. So how can we retrain ourselves to adopt new reflexes? So there are several tips we have here on the interpersonal level. So the first is to accept and allow differences, the let it be philosophy. So this is where we allow more flexibility for our people on our team or in our organization to manage themselves, so that we can accommodate different personal situations and preferences. This is also allowing for people to support different family situations, childcare, caring for erring parents, that kind of thing. And lastly, to encourage management to invest in improving the benefits offering. So how can we better support a diverse group of people? The second point is to expect excellence from everyone. So to have high expectations as a leader, but also it's very important to have those expectations be clear, be objective, and to share the standards for evaluation. Next, you want to be able to give your trust to everyone. So this is demonstrating that you have confidence in everyone, no matter what their background is, no matter what their ethnicity, what culture, what educational background, to demonstrate that you have confidence in their ability to meet the standards. And then this last point is very important. This is about how we make decisions as leaders. So it's important that we seek the participation of a diverse group of people, that we appreciate ideas from others and we say it, that we vary the way we receive feedback and contributions. Some people are very comfortable speaking in public, for example. Others prefer one-on-one conversation or giving information in a written format, for example. This feeds into this idea of having different mechanisms for feedback. So we can use voting, suggestion box, face-to-face, and if necessary, secret ballots, where people can vote anonymously. Next, we want to be sure that we're going to people before or after a meeting to ask for their ideas. So seeking out perspectives that might be different from ours. And then paying close attention to who is included. And this gets to the point of inclusion versus diversity. So who is invited to participate in certain calls or meetings? Who is left off certain emails? Who is given an opportunity to express themselves? Paying attention to that as a leader is very important. And lastly, giving honest feedback to everyone, giving all team members the same opportunity to grow.
Thank you, Nika. Shall I go to the next slide?
Yes, please. So we've just talked about some ways to manage bias at the personal level. Here's another kind of summary of some key principles and kind of points, especially important to keep in mind if conflict arises. And we know that when you have a very diverse team, when you're bringing together many people from different backgrounds and different perspectives, that there's a chance conflict can arise and that miscommunications can happen. And so when that happens, it's important for us to apply these principles. So first, thinking of others as individuals, not stereotypes and not as a member of a group. Treating others with kindness and respect. Recognizing that different points of view present an opportunity. When there's a conflict, there's an opportunity for us to learn, to be open to new perspectives. Another key is to assume that everyone is well-intentioned. Now, we know everyone in our lives is not well-intentioned, but when it comes to managing a team, assuming people are well-intentioned and giving the benefit of the doubt is very important. Next, focus on the team's common goals and objectives. Why are we all here? What's our goal? What do we share? Next, to resolve the tensions or conflicts, we have to be honest and straightforward. And lastly, don't be afraid to ask for advice. In diversity and inclusion issues, often we can feel unsure. Often we feel like we don't have the right answer. So never hesitate to ask for advice. Shall we go on to the next one, Sophia?
Okay.
And so again, at the manager level, there's some other key principles. So agility. As a leader, you're going to have to be flexible. We're going to have to adapt our styles and approaches. We already discussed this point, but to be fair and transparent. So how do we make decisions? Who's included? What are the policies? And are those groups for developing policy diverse? How do we communicate? Communication is very important. So this is practicing active listening, maintaining confidentiality. And then Sophia, do you want to share with us some of the other points?
Yeah, sure. So among the behavior that the manager must develop to manage diversity in the workplace, there is the psychological safety, the belief that crew members can take risk without being perceived as ignorant, incompetent, negative, or disruptive. He must allow people to give their feedback and encourage feedback, no matter if what they are saying is without and insist, sorry, on the fact that there is no bad suggestion or bad idea. Everybody must feel free to propose and to speak. There is also the respect and mutual understanding. A manager must recognize and value differences, express empathy and appreciation, and clarify the values that he wants to manage his team with. There is also the humility and open-mindedness. As a manager, one must be open and receptive to new way of learning, accept feedback, be reflective, and make meaningful changes when opportunities arise.
Yes, the most important thing as a manager is to remember to lead by example and truly role model the behavior you want to see in your team. So we've talked about the interpersonal reflexes. What can we do on the individual level to support diversity and inclusion efforts? Then we talked about, as a manager, what things you have to keep in mind when it comes to managing diverse teams. Here, we'll talk about at the enterprise level, at the organization or firm level, what can you actually do to integrate diversity into management policy? So here we have a few suggestions, and we'd be happy to hear yours. If you can put your ideas in the chat, if you know of things that your organization is doing or you have suggestions for what works. But the first is to have a diversity or inclusion program or policy in place. So this might touch on some of the things we discussed earlier. So behavioral expectations, limiting discrimination, expecting managers to uphold certain standards in terms of supporting diverse teams, having accountability mechanisms. When people do violate the values or the policies related to diversity, do we have a mechanism to hold them accountable? And as a leader, do we also provide support and resources to support diversity and inclusion initiatives? Do we walk the talk, so to speak? The second point is to actually set goals for diversity, and not just ambiguous, arbitrary goals, but goals with clear milestones and a timeline for implementation. So this, in recruitment policy, for example, might look like quotas. We have to have a certain number of women in a candidate pool, or we intend to hire a certain percentage of X minority group into leadership positions. In procurement, for example, what would that look like? It might look like we would like to procure from a certain number of small businesses, or businesses that operate in the local economy, or businesses that are owned by women. There are many, many different metrics you can put in place there. For assignments and tasks, that might involve making sure that high-profile opportunities are distributed equally. So are women having opportunities to speak in public forums, to give presentations on behalf of the leadership, to present to the leadership if we're talking about people who may not have good representation at the middle management level. And then in terms of business strategy and decisions, I'm sure many of you as female leaders can list numerous examples, but it could include anything from who do you market to, who are your consumers, do we have inclusive images in our advertising, who do we want to market our product to, and how do we expand our consumer base? All of those decisions can be linked to diversity metrics. And lastly, you want to establish measures to assess your progress. So this would be looking at firm key performance indicators related to diversity. So we mentioned a few earlier, but this could be the number of women or the number of minorities or the number of people with disabilities in certain leadership positions or in certain positions of influence and those types of things. So I think, Sophia, can we go on to the next?
Yeah, sure.
So I think that brings us down to the last bit of the call, where we have about 10 minutes left to take a few questions. And I think this would be a great opportunity to hear from some of our fantastic leaders on this call. We have 76 of you on the line. So if you could share some of the things your organization is doing in relation to diversity, things that it's measuring in relation to diversity, if anything, some of the challenges you might be facing, or some of the questions you have, go ahead and share in the chat, and Sophia and I will be able to respond. I see one good question here from Dr. Jacqueline. So many organizations feel that it is okay to embrace diversity as it is assumed to demonstrate inclusion. How does one, especially women, push to have true inclusion? Are there strategies that can help us push to have a voice at the table? So that's a very good question. I will see if any of our participants also have a response in the chat. How can we push to have true inclusion, especially for women? Any ideas there before I share my thoughts? Or Sophia, if you have anything, feel free to jump in.
All right, it's well noted, Nicole.
Okay. So I see Kathy has a suggestion, using gender-sensitive language in job applications to encourage more female applicants. She thinks is particularly impactful. So that's a great suggestion. So making sure that the way you do your hiring and advertise for positions and vacancies is inclusive. So making sure that you don't use language that tends to exclude women or discourage women from applying. That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Kathy, for that. Any other ideas? I know, for example, on the Deloitte side, we often do webinars like this one, or forums related to business or certain types of industry. And often we'll look to have a mix, not just of gender, but also of culture or regional representation or linguistic representation for a panel, for example, or a forum. And that can be a very good way of highlighting women's voices in leadership. Also making sure that things are inclusive, that women are given an opportunity to not just be at the table, but share their views, equal talking time, for example, during a public forum. I see Isioma here said to encourage male allies in the workplace. That's a great suggestion. Folosu says to speak up more and advocate for women coming up behind you, which is always a challenge depending on where you work, but also a good idea. Any other thoughts or questions on how to actually have an inclusive environment for women? I think for many women, there are a lot of concerns related to family and home responsibilities. And so for many organizations, there is a challenge around human resource policy. Do we have flexibility in terms of hours? Can people take time off if their child is sick? Do we have supportive policy for maternity leave, for example? And so making sure that those policies are supportive of women is also very important, and one way to be more inclusive, not just saying you're here and you have to play by the rules that men play by necessarily.
Thank you, Nicole. May I share also my thoughts on this question?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So just to complete, let me just go back to one question that was asked by somebody who works for the United Nations and who was commenting about diversity in the boardroom. And she was saying that at the UN now the ratio is 50% male and 50% female. What is interesting from this example is that there is a huge gap between inclusion of women in private companies and how it works in, let's say, states or international institutions. And the lesson that we have learned from governments and international organizations who have managed to reach this level of this proportion of women in the executive board is that it was mandatory. It was implemented through a mandatory way. They have imposed quotas. So target is to have 50% of women in the government, and governments have worked year after year to try to reach this level. What we can learn from this experience is that maybe, and unfortunately, maybe the only way for women to reach this level, the level of inclusion we want to target, which is inclusion, is having the right to vote, is having the power to vote, is having the power to vote in the place where you work. So maybe the only way, the only option to reach this level of inclusion is to apply to private businesses the same methods and the same modus operandi than the one that has been applied in government and public institutions, which is make it simply mandatory. You have to have half of your exec board that has I don't know, female or people from different origin and so on.
That's a great point. That's a great point. I think there's a few other comments in the chat that we can get to. So Alphonsine, diversity and inclusion have to be done genuinely and not just to look good externally. And I think that actually links to Jacqueline's question on how to have true inclusion. And we looked at the beginning of the session at the difference between the two. And I think most of us can probably give examples of where we've seen companies say they're diverse and they support diversity, but they aren't inclusive, or we've read about them in the news or whatever. And so I think Alphonsine's point here of you actually have to be doing it genuinely in order for inclusion to work is very important, because if you're only doing it for external partners, then it can't be inclusive by nature. So I think that's a very, very good point to highlight. Layani also had a point here that one of the challenges is also language, and that's true. That's an element of diversity. I think you can tell Sophia, I think, speaks French as a native speaker, and I speak English. So, you know, we always have different expressions that we use that maybe sometimes lead to misunderstanding and things like that. So that's definitely an element of diversity that has to be considered as well, and has many upsides, many, many upsides as well. Are there any other questions, or Sophia, anything you'd like to add to any of the comments in the chat?
On the chat, as a woman, be diligent at what you do. It builds the confidence to speak. Would you like to comment this one?
Yeah, so that's a great one. We actually had a session, I think session 2 in this series was on self-confidence, and how you project that confidence in the workplace, and how that can actually lead people to have more trust in you and give you more responsibility and that kind of thing. And that's a part of it as well, for sure. I think Glenys also has an interesting point here. So encouraging more women to support other women, because many women still do not believe that they should participate. And I think that's a very, very, very important thing, because I think a lot of times, especially when it relates to gender equity in the diversity conversation, a lot of times it's, oh, women need to educate men, or men need to change something about what they're doing, which is true. But we also have, just as Sophia explained in the section on bias, we all have biases. And sometimes you'll come across women who also have biases against other women for whatever reason. And so that's something we definitely need to be aware of as well, is how not just the typical biases that we expect to see, but how some of these more subtle biases express themselves as well. Okay, well, I think we've covered most of the questions in the chat, and I see that we're actually out of time for today. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining us. Thank you so much for participating. I apologize again for the technical issues we had earlier. Hopefully that won't happen again, but we're having some internet problems in Congo at the moment. But thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next month at the next session. Please don't hesitate to check the WIA website to see the rest of the program. These sessions will be held monthly until December. So please feel free to join. We also have the session available in French.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Thank you to everyone for your participation. And we're looking forward to have you soon.
Yes, thank you. Have a good evening.